Hello, my name is Leila. I'm 25 and I'm from East London. Today I'm going to talk to you about campaigning and climate change. But before we unpick that, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about myself. So as I said, I'm from East London and I absolutely love it there. I've just moved to Romford, so if anyone listening is from Romford, I equally love Romford like I love Barking. While I was in Barking, I was involved in many different social justice issues, and that was my sort of real encounter with campaigning. So when I was 14, I remember there were bins left outside my house for about 3 weeks. And I remember saying to my nan, why are the bins still there? So every Tuesday we'd drop our bins outside and the council would come and collect them. 3 Tuesdays went by, the bins were still there. And I thought, right, okay, something needs to be done about this. And I used to get so embarrassed walking to and from school and the bins were just sort of piling up, and there were loads of tower blocks around us, so I lived on an estate. So as the bins would sort of pile up, the more sort of foxes and cats would get at them, there'd be rubbish everywhere. So I went into school and I just couldn't stop talking about it. And the teacher said, right, okay, why don't you write a letter to the council? So at 14, I sort of had no idea who I'd be sending this letter to or sort of whose hands it would end up in. But I wrote this long letter, I think it was about 3 pages, going on and on about how this is just unacceptable and it smells getting bad. And I gave it to my nan and I said, I want you to give this to our council. And she said, I'll give it to our local MP. So I said, right, okay. A week later, the bins were collected. And I was convinced at the age of 14 that this was completely my doing. You know, the council would sort this out because I wrote to the council and they said, we must do it because Leila said so. But really, it was a collective action. So I later found out that the lady who lived across us at one of the other tower blocks, she had been on the phone to the council for weeks. And my neighbour to the right of me had actually also drafted a letter and sent it off to the council. So on reflection, it was I was just adding my voice to a movement essentially, and that was my first experience with campaigning. But at the age of 14, I didn't know it was campaigning. I just had this feeling of upset and anger, and I wanted to do something about it. And that's kind of followed me through my entire life. I felt upset about something or angry, and I've wanted to do something about it. And after that sort of encounter, I had a really similar one where one of my friends came into school and said the exact same thing was happening. She said, oh, the council not collecting the bins, I'm really upset, what did you do about it? And I sort of started to picture myself as this movement maker, and I was like, right, okay, you need to write to your MP and she'll fix it. But they didn't fix it. And she'd come in the week later and she said, oh, but the bins are still not collected, or they're collecting only some of them and some of them are still there. And it also made me realise that you don't always win every battle straight away with campaigning, and at a young age I realised that. So I just want to pause for a second because I want you to think about if there's been any moments where you felt upset or anger about something that's either happened within school, at home. It could even be in a family setting where someone has said something that you completely disagree with. What sort of emotions did that stir up? And did you do something about it? You might not have, because there are things that happen to me that I always intend to, you know, say something to someone or write something to someone to try and fix it. But life can get really busy, and particularly during a global pandemic. But yeah, just take a moment to think about what has upset you and what has been your motivation, if to do anything, what's been your motivation to do that. So now I'm going to unpick my first experience with the climate crisis and what motivated me to use my voice and to spread awareness, but also to try and just sort of add my voice to a campaign that already existed. So when I was 21, I had the privilege of going to Fiji. So I went to university, I studied sociology, I absolutely loved it. And and there was a programme where you could go overseas. There were 3 different countries you could go to, and I sort of said, put me anywhere. I just would love to experience different cultures and be immersed into a different culture. And I remember they said, okay, you're best fit for Fiji, so you're going to go there. So I went first when I was 21, and then I went back at 22 as an expedition leader. So I was leading volunteers to different villages for a month each time, and you'd really be immersed in the Fijian culture. You'd stay there in a village and you'd have a Fijian family, and you'd call them Nene and Toto, and that would be your mum and dad. And they really did become family. Leaving them was one of the hardest things. But while I was there, I went just after Cyclone Winston. And while I was in one of the villages, I remember asking my Fijian mum, why were some of the houses only half built, and why was the school, why were children still having to learn outside? And I remember her telling me, go and get all the volunteers and we're gonna talk about Cyclone Winston. So I went and gathered everyone, and we were laying on the floor, and she told us the stories about how Cyclone Winston affected her life, the family members she lost, how devastating it was, and how different areas of Fiji just still haven't recovered, and the amount of people that were lost due to that disaster. And as I went from village to village, I just was obsessed with Cyclone Winston. I'd ask so many questions and ask them, how much did you experience it in this village? And as we travelled around, the stories just got had so much detail and meaning behind it, because you become so attached to these people. But the common theme that was running through every story was that these natural disasters were getting worse and worse and worse, and that was because of climate change. And I didn't know much about climate change. I didn't know the science behind it. I just knew that everyone kept on saying these 2 words. So I thought, right, I need to understand more. So I remember getting home and I was just Googling as much as I can, asking people about it. And I learned that in the West, we contribute the most to the climate change, but people in the global south are the ones at the forefront of the climate crisis, and they contribute the least to it. You know, it's estimated that between 300 million to 600 million people are going to experience water stress by 2050 because of climate change. And those sort of numbers just didn't sit right with me. And 14-year-old Leila came right back, and I was like, something needs to be done about this. So like I said, I just Googled climate change, and the Climate Coalition came up. I thought, right, okay, I'm just going to volunteer with them and see how much I can learn about it. Because although I knew I was passionate about this, and it was just so unfair that people that aren't contributing the least to this problem are affected so severely by it every day. And we are feeling the impacts of climate change within the UK, 100%. You know, our summers are getting so much hotter, pollution, our winters are getting so much colder, you know, weathers are really extreme. But people overseas are experiencing it and at the forefront of it in a complete different way. So I started volunteering with the Climate Coalition, and I was just learning so much. I was trying to get involved as much as possible. And then we went, and then I got a really amazing experience again, and I went to Edinburgh. And while I was there, I got talking to another Fijian lady. I don't know why I'm always ending up with Fijians, but she started again speaking to me about Cyclone Winston. And she said when she came over here to the UK, she realised that people weren't doing anything about it. But people in Fiji, they had like Fijian climate warriors that were tackling it and were trying to raise awareness. But why were people that weren't contributing the most to it having to use their voice the most? And people in the UK, she just couldn't believe, you know, she was trying to find people that movements to get involved in and raise awareness. But she said the busy day-to-day life of cities in the UK just didn't have time for her or her voice. And, you know, that really upset me again. And I stayed in contact with her, and I tried to understand as much as possible what she was going through. And, you know, a lot of the times you hear people say you need to give a voice to the voiceless, but they have a voice, they're not voiceless, so we should hear their voice. So I went back after Edinburgh, and I carried on volunteering with the Climate Coalition, but still sort of with the fire reignited inside of me, wanting to do so much more. And I got the opportunity to write a school pack, and I gathered case studies from overseas, and the school pack was all about climate change and how young people overseas are affected by it. And I worked with Oxfam and Send My Friend to School, and amazing organisations that are doing brilliant work to tackle climate change overseas. And we got stories from a girl in Rwanda, and she spoke specifically about her experience of getting to and from school and the food shortages that she was experiencing. And when I was talking to other young people about this, they couldn't believe it. The first thing that came into mind with climate change was polar bears and reusable cups and making sure you take your plastic bags to the shop. But not that young people that are the exact same age as them, 16, 17, 18, were wondering where their next meal was going to come, because that summer there was a drought, and or the extreme rains meant their crops weren't growing. So if you grab a piece of paper and a pen now, I'm going to read out 4 different statements, and I just want you to think about them. Maybe as I'm saying it, write that statement down, and then think about if you totally agree with this, totally disagree, or you're not sure. So when I've done this exercise, I found it really helpful to jot down the statement, and then just do a long line, totally disagree, agree, and then don't know in the middle, and then just do 1, 2, 3, 4 as you're going down the line. So it's like a sort of opinion line. So the first statement is, the main impact of climate change is being felt by people in developing countries. Do you totally agree with this, or totally disagree with this, or you're not sure? Okay, so the next statement is, most people who live in developing countries have contributed very little to the cause of the climate crisis. So hopefully everything I've said before this has sort of shaped your opinion maybe a little bit. So do you totally agree with this, disagree, or you don't know? The next statement is, when I think of the climate crisis, I immediately think of the negative impact it's having on school children overseas. And then the final statement is, adults don't listen to young people when they talk about the climate crisis. So now I'm going to read a case study from Jessie, who's 18 and lives in Malawi. But while I'm reading it, I want you to think about that opinion line. So have it in front of you and think, while I'm reading this case study, do any of your opinions change? And also, what problems and solutions are arising from this case study? So problems because of the climate crisis that Jessie's having to face every day, and solutions. So I'll read it now for you. Climate change is causing the rains where I live to be unpredictable. It has been hard for my parents to grow enough food for all of my family and have some left over to sell. The money they make from selling food goes towards our school fees. Due to the unpredictable weather and the rains, they cannot plan when to plant their crops, and this causes the crops to often fail. Therefore, I sometimes miss school because my parents couldn't make enough money for me to go to school or pay for my school fees. I have to collect water for my family, but the river closest to our village has dried up because of climate change. It takes longer to collect water now, and I often miss lessons because of this. As I am a girl, I face other challenges in my education. Some people where I live think that boys are more important than girls, and so more boys go to school than girls. If parents cannot afford school fees, it is often the girls that will miss out. I think it is important for everyone to have an education because you need an education for success. I also think it's important for people in richer countries to change their lifestyle and produce less of the emissions that cause climate change. Jessie's obviously spoken about her parents not being able to sell crops for her to attend school. And the climate crisis, as I've said before, disproportionately affects different groups of people in society. So in the UK, it's most likely to obviously affect working class people, but everyone will feel effects of it in some way or another. But right now, people in the global south are at the forefront. So that's a perfect example of how Jessie is at the forefront. She's missing her human right to education because of the climate crisis, because of the actions of richer countries. So I'm just going to pause again for just a time of reflection to think about Jessie's story and to think about the problems and the solutions. To talk about a school that are actually working really hard to tackle climate change. So we heard Jessie's stories, we know the severity of it. St Thomas Aquinas School, they heard Jessie's story, they know the severity of it, so they thought we want to do something about it. And this is a primary school. So this is what they sent in to me. At St Thomas Aquinas School, we are working incredibly hard to tackle climate change. We recycle crisp packets, only allow fruit or vegetables for a snack to reduce plastic wrappers and to promote a healthy lifestyle. And we educate the pupils on the effects of global warming, plastic pollution, and how to recycle. And while I was gathering this case study, I couldn't believe how much these young people wanted to do. They were just sort of saying, well, if we recycle everything, everything's going to be fine, right? And I had to sort of explain to them in a really child-friendly way the complexities of climate change, and that, you know, it really, everyone has to do their part. But I was so inspired by the whole school, and you know, they had an eco committee and they were meeting every week and doing plans on how the following year, you know, what they could put in place, and what they could put in place right now. And they were in communications with young people overseas as well, and trying to understand what they're going through, which I just thought was amazing. I think, and if from a young age you can be aware of your surroundings and, you know, lifestyle changes, it's helpful for also going home and just telling your parents that, you know, 1 day a week, 2 days a week, 3 days a week, please can we substitute meat, or being aware of the plastics that are around your house. They're just sort of personal things that you can do, and if at school, you know, they're implemented, it's likely for it to also happen at home. But just to sort of jump back now and talk about my personal journey a bit more, and what sort of sustains me to keep going, because of course right now there is so much going on, and I feel like people often get campaign fatigue. It's like there's so many problems, how do you choose one? I mean, we're living through a global pandemic right now, you know, that's big enough problem as it is. To then start thinking about, you know, the devastating impacts of police brutality in the US and the UK, you know, different areas are facing different problems, you know, embarking in particular. I remember when I first started volunteering with the Climate Coalition, I'd come home and I'd be a bit on my high horse, and I'd say, well, I think that everyone should get electric cars. And, you know, it was just, I was in a different world a little bit. I was in a bit of a climate bubble where I thought everyone had to do these 10 things and everything would be okay, but it doesn't work like that. And often you try to say to someone, well, why don't you get an electric car? And they'd say, there's many reasons. And one of them is because I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to put on my child's plate tomorrow for dinner. Climate change is not my immediate problem. And that's understandable. And I'm not trying to make it everyone's immediate problem. I'm just trying to have everyone understand that it's a crisis and we do all have a part to play in it. And if, you know, getting an electric car is not everyone's cup of tea, or it's not feasible for everyone, that's okay. There's things that everyone can do. But I often heard people say to me in working class areas, you know, the politicians, Caroline Lucas, who I absolutely love from the Green Party, so I'm not dissing her here, but she did want to tax meat. And I just thought, well, you can't, and this is what people would come back to me and tell me, and it was so right. How can you tax meat? Because all that will happen is that you're going to outprice the poor. The rich are still going to buy meat. They're going to buy their lovely cuts from Waitrose and M&S. And the poor are going to be outpriced and buy really cheap, horrible cuts of meat. So where is the benefit here really? They're still going to be eating meat, but just it's going to be worse because they're going to be buying cheap cuts of it. And so sometimes it feels like you're out to get the wrong people, you're out to hurt working class people, and it's a very middle class movement to be involved in. But that's not the case. Climate change, everyone can be involved in it, everyone can use their voice for it. And I also found that when talking about climate change, always try and relate it to yourself. So I realised that because I became really obsessed with it and I was in a bit of a bubble, when I'd come home and talk to family and friends about it, it was so far removed from their daily life, they couldn't meet me in the middle. So talking about electric cars and why don't you buy meat only twice a week, and they'd often say, but fruit and veg and organic and things that are not in plastic, do you know how expensive that is? And I couldn't believe that I'd removed myself that far from the world that I came from. So I had to just go all the way back and strip it all down. So really know your audience if you want to talk about climate change and how you can and relate to them. And finally, just again, back to Jessie's story, I'd often just tell anyone that would listen, I'd say, okay, listen to Jessie's story. And that would move them without having to meet her. So I think, don't feel overwhelmed by just using your voice or doing little bits every day. So if it is right now all you can do is recycle, then that's all you can do and that's okay. If it is all you can do is use your voice and just tell Jessie's story to as many people that will listen, that means something. But I feel try your hardest not to feel overwhelmed by all the different problems that are going on in the world and wanting to add your voice to every problem. Because I know I often want to, I want to raise my voice about the Black Lives Matters movement. I want to raise my voice about climate change. I want to raise my voice about women's rights, but they're all interlinked. You can't care about Black Lives Matter and not care about climate change, and you can't care about women's rights and not care about climate change, because those groups of people are going to be disproportionately affected by climate change. So we have to care about all of them, because they're all interlinked essentially. And the most important thing that gets me through all of this has to be my faith. Like I said, global pandemic, it's really stressful, and sometimes you don't even want to get out of bed and put, a face of makeup on or put your clothes on. You just want to stay in your pajamas all day. But I've realised that taking a minute out to to pray and just sort of try and see where God is in all of this. So when I become overwhelmed and I hear stories and I think, well, we're not going quick enough, we're not going fast enough, our policymakers are not implementing the right, targets to tackle climate change, and what can we do? I try and take a minute and try and see God in it, one, and also pray for those decision makers. And it helps me to sort of take a moment out and go for walks and to see God in sort of all of my surroundings. And that sort of relaxes me and gets me pumped up, ready to go again and start tackling the climate crisis. But also Laudato Si. I know Pope Francis has just said so many amazing things about the climate. But I don't know how many of you have read an encyclical before, but me, I haven't. Laudato Si was the first one. They're very hefty books and they're really complicated. So I found it so hard to try and get into any of them. But Laudato Si was one that I read from start to finish. And I was there with my highlighter, like, this is gold. Like, what Pope Francis is saying is just perfect. And, we're not dominions over the earth. The earth was gifted to us and we have to treat it with respect. But I remember talking to Laudato Si about people that weren't even Catholic. And they said, oh yeah, I've read Laudato Si, and the Pope just bang on with this and the Pope bang on with that. And it was just so inspiring to know that, our leader of the church is saying things that resonate with so many people, but also that, he's bang on the money. He's right. This is one of the greatest issues of our time. And, us, the church, have to do something about it and use our voices to do so. So I'm just going to, again, pause, because I know I've been talking loads at you, to think about a moment where your faith has sort of sustained you and helped you sort of pause and give you that energy to go back and use your voice for something that means something to you. So my final takeaway for today is engaging with your Member of Parliament. So some of you listening might not know who your MP is, which is absolutely fine. Some of you might already be in contact with them. But take a minute to find out who your MP is, what their voting record is on climate change, and what you want to say to them about it. So climate change, like I said, we spoke about loads here today. It's very broad. So you can take a minute to find out what particularly interests you about climate change, read up about it, and then write to your MP about that. So find something that you're passionate about, because that will always come across when you're writing to your MP. Right now, because of COVID, I know you can't actually meet with your MPs in their surgery. So I know surgery sounds scary, it's not. It's just a meeting with constituents and an MP where you talk about what you care about. And sometimes it's local issues, or sometimes, you can bring issues that maybe questions that you want them to ask and bring to the Prime Minister. But write to your MP and tell them what you care about, but also maybe send them something. So I often send my MP a green heart, which is it's part of Show the Love, which is part of a climate coalition campaign. And I sort of say, I'm showing the love for the people in Fiji that I deeply care about. Please can you, boom, boom, boom. And something like, or if it's about sustainable fashion, you could say, please can you vote this way on sustainable fashion, or can you raise this issue in the House? But yeah, I always write to your MP, because, they do read your letters, and particularly if it's coming from the heart and they're your words and you haven't just copy and pasted a template. And don't feel put off if your MP is not who you elected. So if the party doesn't align with you, that's fine. They're elected to represent you nevertheless. So I live in Romford right now. I'm part of the Labour Party, but Andrew Rosendale is my MP, who's from the Conservative Party. That's fine. I still write to him. I still tell him my opinions, and hopefully he listens. But so yeah, don't be put off by that. And my top tip is always find God in everything and take a minute for prayer, because that always calms me down and gets me ready to keep going. So educate yourself, write to your MP, and find God in everything. They're sort of my 3 takeaways from all of this. I'm now going to finish with a prayer, and it's one of my favourites from Laudato Si. So if you just take a minute to collect your thoughts. And we start this prayer in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. A prayer for our earth. All-powerful God, you are present in the whole universe and in the smallest of your creatures. You embrace with your tenderness all that exists. Pour out upon us the power of your love, that we may protect life and beauty. Fill us with peace, that we may live as brothers and sisters, harming no one. O God of the poor, help us to rescue the abandoned and forgotten of this earth, so precious in your eyes. Bring healing to our lives, that we may protect the world and not prey on it, that we may sow beauty, not pollution. Touch the hearts of those who look only for gain. Teach us to discover the worth of each thing, to be filled with awe and contemplation, to recognise that we are profoundly united with every creature. As we journey towards your infinite light, we thank you for being with us each day. Encourage us, we pray. Keep us strong. Encourage us in our struggle. Amen. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen today. And everything that I mentioned, such as the Climate Coalition's Show the Love campaign and Jessie's story, there'll be links to that below or here, wherever Beth's going to put them. And then finally, I just want to say that Jessie's story came from a teacher's pack that I created last year while I was working for the Climate Coalition. So if you're a teacher and you're watching this, there's a link to everything I've said. So the opinion line, St Thomas Aquinas, the school case study that I pulled together, and Jessie's story, all on a teacher's pack that you can deliver to your pupils or catechists. You can also deliver, so there'll also be a link to that. Thank you.